Welcome to this episode from the Good, the Bad, and the Odd of Kingology. Today I'm going to be talking about the next one in the series, which is Firestarter by Stephen King. I'm going to talk about the book and then the film. Okay, I have read this book before. It's been a while. On reread, I kind of enjoyed it. It was a more slightly less engaging work than some of his others. Well, it was more workmanlike, I found it, rather than it doesn't hit some of the artistry I felt he hit in a lot of his earlier works. Things like, I guess the most similar work to this in what we've already talked about is probably Carrie, maybe. Obviously, there's elements of the Dead Zone, but more Carrie really. I appreciate he focused on a small set of characters, and he explored them reasonably well. And it was interesting. He took a lot of time going over the sort of ins and outs of the shop rather than keeping them mysterious. They were you started to understand they were just guys doing their job, even though it was a very dodgy, underhand, immoral kind of dealings with things. And I think King was picking up from the zeitgeist here. You know, there were stories of the CIA doing experiments with LSD on people, working out truth serums and stuff that emerged. So he was sort of merging a few strands here. There was also in the air in the late 70s a lot of talk of spontaneous combustion. I remember it being quite significant and a big thing. It's not something you hear about much these days. You know, lots of other conspiracy stuff's taken over, but chupacabras and things like that. But spontaneous combustion was an interesting sort of well explored in the world of pseudoscience anyway, sort of thing. Books about and stuff like that. So King was drawing from all of these strands. But I think he was also influenced by his own experiences of parenthood and child rearing, and potty training and dealing with little kiddies that sort of don't understand the consequences of what they do, and teaching kids not to hurt themselves and things like that. I think he also took a lead from that story. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. It's a story that's covered in the Twilight Zone, the movie film of I think it's A Good Life. I think it's called, of the kid who's got power to do absolutely anything and how his parents deal with him. They can't, in effect, but how that's dealt with. There's a bit of that in it. It's a very engaging book, but I'd put it on the same pole with, say, Dead Zone. I just don't find it a great book. I find it a good book. It's a great read. I'll say that. It's a real page turner. Though I think it kind of, the ending doesn't quite work as well. And when I say ending, I mean the climax involving the barn. There is further stuff after that. There's the genuine ending, which I think was fine, but the ending in the barn just feels a bit messy and unstructured. Which King is the king of the muse, as if you forgive the pun. He believes the muse will take you where it takes you, and that's it. I don't think he's that heavily into planning stories unless it's a really big story. But he just takes where, and for the most part that serves him very well. But I'm not sure it was a great ending in the way, say, Carrie was a great ending. I'm going to compare it to Carrie again. I found Carrie much more absorbing and visceral, and you got a real tension to it. Whereas this it was all right in the moment, but feeling back again, it's a bit nondescript. It's a bit hard to remember the sort of the ins and outs of it and feel really involved in it. It was also interesting. He made the bad guy probably the most interesting character. Rainbird was by far the most interesting character talked about. Charlie's dad, while he was in it quite a bit, he wasn't that rounded. He felt he was a bit of a non-character as far as King was concerned. Even though he spent a lot of time with him, I didn't really get a feel for Charlie's dad's character. So, I mean, we get to know more about him in the flashbacks, dealing with Charlie's mother, but not so much about him once he's part of the shop. I guess if you think about it, in the story, a father in this position is just going to be concerned about escaping. There's not going to be much roundedness to him. He's just going to try and protect his daughter and escape, and that's kind of what happens. And again, Charlie, I kind of like how he dealt with Charlie. She was just a little girl, right? But I like how King makes her not just a passive character and not just she's changeable. She's a more complex character than the little children are often written. There's times when she's passive and there's times where she's kind of forthright and kind of aggressive. In fact, I think there's a line in the book where he describes her as she's an aggressive little girl and so on and so on. And she's I kind of like her, but it's not much of a character to hang a whole story on. And I guess Rainbird became that sort of character to hang things on. Rainbird's motivations were kind of odd, though you kind of got it. It was about death, and he was a man who dealt with death for so long. He was interested in it, in finding out as much as he could about him, and possibly a spectacular death. I'm not entirely sure on that. It was a good solid read, but it wasn't a great read. I definitely recommend reading it. I enjoyed it enough whilst I was reading, but it pales somewhat compared to the works I've discussed earlier. Having said that, it is kind of a classic, I'd say, a Stephen King classic. But I think all the ones I've covered so far could be called that, frankly. They're all pretty damn solid. He's going for a great run here. Recommended book. That's all I'm going to say about that. Let's turn to the film. I think Firestarter came out in 1980. I could be wrong. It was around that time. It might have been a little earlier. So King was very popular and in the media at this time. I think Salem's Lot, the TV series, had been out and made King a real household name. Everyone knew him, little kids, everyone. So Firestarter was an interesting next step. But the film Firestarter came out in 1984. They kind of... Dead Zone was made just before this, and it's interesting that they used Martin Sheen again. He played Greg Stilson, the sort of slightly psychotic politician type, and they got Sheen back in. But unfortunately, he gave almost the same performance. He played... I think King even described it himself. He said Sheen was playing Greg Stilson, not the Cap. And that's how it comes across. He's a much more significant character in the film, the Cap, than he is in the book. He's much more. He takes a more active role in preceding the experiment, which kind of makes sense. But this film, so 1984 it came out. Drew Barrymore played Charlie. Now, Drew Barrymore was a pretty bad actress at this age. In E.T., where she's famous from, because she was only had a few scenes here and there, you can kind of forgive it, or you can sort of let it go. But in this, she's front and centre, and she's a terrible actress. However, she's only 8. You got to accept that. I know we've had some really great performances from kids like Haley Joel Osment and things like that in recent years, but she's 8. However, and I think that's forgivable. However, there were some other actors in this who are solid actors who are just as bad. Well, maybe not quite that bad, but pretty bad. Art Carney is, and it's a non-performance, really. Sheen's not delivering the performance of Cap at all, and I sort of kind of blame the direction on that. George C. Scott is very flat in this. He was okay. I just think it could have had a bit more life to him, a bit more zest. In this, he was kind of laid back, and there was a few. The only act was it the dad was I forget his name. I think it's Keith David. I always get Keith David and David Keith mixed up, so understandably. But I kind of like him in other stuff. I liked him in Brubaker, and I think he was in Officer and a Gentleman, and he was okay. But in this, he really looked like he couldn't act properly, which was a shame. I think he's got a lot of charisma. I'm just checking the name. But he just, I don't know. David Keith, sorry, that was it. He just doesn't come across well. Freddie Jones was pretty good, though, as Wanless. But he's not in it that much. I think they should have kept him through the second phase of experiments rather than doing what they did and following the story fairly tightly. I would have liked to have seen a bit more Freddie Jones. I like Freddie Jones, and I think this came out or was made after June, so he had formed with De Laurentiis with June. He was in June, so they probably knew him as an actor and got him in. He was okay in this. Louise Fletcher's also in it, very briefly. She gives a good performance for a very, very short part. But overall, I thought this was a really dreadful film. There was one redeeming feature. No, there was a couple of redeeming things that lift it from being terrible to bit okay in places. There was a bit in where just before Charlie and her dad are taken, they're in a sort of a cabin. And once they get taken, all these men in fireproof suits suddenly emerge from the trees, almost like silver ninjas. I thought that was kind of a cool shot, even though it was very flat and not very cinematic. It was kind of a cool shot. And the actual ending where Charlie goes mad on the fire and she's sending fireballs out towards people and they're trying to shoot her and it's just not working. She's overcoming them. That was pretty cool, but some of the other stuff was just bad. The whole hair suddenly being breezed back by the breeze whenever she does her stuff, it was stupid. And the whole bit in the barn was probably one of the worst scenes I've ever seen as a climax, and I'm using inverted commas, of a movie you'll ever see. It was just awful. Just silly and awful. But once she comes out of the barn, it kind of picks up quite a bit. It was pretty bad overall. 3 out of 10 I give this film. Okay, that covers Firestarter. Next time, I'm covering Roadwork by Richard Bachman. Stephen King, obviously. I thought I'd read this, but I started to read the synopsis of it, and then it didn't ring any bells, so I stopped reading the synopsis of it because I didn't want it to be spoiled. But I think I've got it confused in my head with another King story called Dolan's Cadillac, which I quite like. And it's not the film I thought it was. Not the book I thought it was, sorry. So this next one might be the first in this run of books I haven't read before, which is kind of exciting. But I've got a horrible feeling I'll get through it. And I thought, yeah, I've read this before, I remember it all. But for now, I'm not sure. Okay, so that's this episode of Kingology. So it's bye from Mark.
Illustrated. I'm a fire starter, twisted fire starter.